give the space, the time to Dr. Lars Schernikau. Dr. Lars, please, your time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Hendra. Good afternoon to Asia, to Jakarta. Thank you for the invitation. Hello, Adianto, and hello, everyone. You can hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we'll try to introduce a couple of subjects on the Asian or Southeast Asian market. I think all of the speakers here have excellent knowledge, and I'll try to introduce a few subjects that we then probably can go into deeper on the later stage in this discussion. Let me first start with the recent Economist cover page saying making coal history, right? The Western world has a very strong urge to stop coal in the world, and it's become extremely political, and it's become very unrealistic. And the reason why we'll talk here, but we're talking about Southeast Asia, one of the fastest growing markets and an important market, and I'll explain why Southeast Asia has no choice but to continue working with coal in a sensible way. The industry faces various crises. We have competition from gas and nuclear worldwide, you're aware. There is significant divestment and a growing share of renewables that the coal industry is struggling with. Of course, there's geopolitical changes, the Australia, US versus China, general polarization in the industry happening right now, which also makes our job in this coal industry quite challenging. And then there's long-term demand and supply issues. Export tightness. Indonesia, we had issues in the past. There's weather issues. Colombia, significant downturn in supply. What all these will impact our markets, including, of course, environment, right? We have clean coal, clean steel discussions, carbon capture and storage, pollution, and of course, the elephant in the room, catastrophic climate change and the Western, what I call political war against coal. We'll not discuss all these subjects today, but I will start with one of my favorite graphs. It's just the past of where the energy is coming from in the past 150 years. And you can see that last year, or let's say 12 months ago, 3% came from wind and solar, and 84% came from fossil fuels. And that is just what we continue to have to realize. And that is why I started with saying that the world has no choice but to continue working with coal, not against coal. Of course, coal itself has a share of over 1/3 in global electricity and over 1/4 of primary energy. Interesting enough is that this will grow in the next 30 to 50 years substantially. And as this will grow, and when you project this time, how in the world can we live without fossil fuels? That doesn't mean we don't have issues, but we have to find ways to make people realize that we have to work with coal, oil, and gas, not against them. Okay, high-level summary. On the left side, we have about 8 billion tons of coal being produced worldwide, of which about 1 billion tons of steam coal are traded. And last year, the market probably fell by about 100 million tons. That's about 10% because of COVID-19. It's a significant figure, more than other commodities, but less than other commodities as well. The seaborne volumes, however, in the last 15 years have doubled. So the question is, what will happen in the future, and what will Southeast Asia's role be in this? I started to put, a little bit of demand supply from last year together, and you see that Indonesia still makes up over 40% of global supply, with Australia about 20%. This is just steam coal. Russia is becoming more and more important, reaching also almost 20%. On the demand side, in terms of growth, last year, all of these markets dropped significantly. Indonesia had the biggest drop, was also the biggest market. But Indonesia, Australia had significant drops in supply last year. Russia managed to stay stable or even slightly grow. Now, on the demand side, the Asian market, including Southeast Asia, without India, was almost 650 million tons. India, another 150 million tons. That's together 800 million tons, or probably over 80% of the market, right? All of these markets fell last year because of COVID. Europe, probably the single biggest drop percentage-wise. I mean, you can see it probably fell 25, 30% last year in terms of imports. Europe, you may remember 10 years ago, was actually the main importing region, and that has changed dramatically. In Asia itself, similar picture, a little bit more basically zoom in, and you have China, India, and here you have the Southeast Asian market, Japan, Korea, Taiwan. Those are basically the 6 main importing regions and the 6 main markets for Indonesia. And you can see, as Adianto was saying, and also Hendra was saying, Southeast Asia is now becoming as big as India in itself. Of course, it's very fragmented market, it's not just one country, but Southeast Asia is important, and it's now over 15% of global market. Southeast Asia grew last year. China also grew in the end, interestingly enough, but we know why. India fell substantially, and some of the East Asian markets fell substantially as well. But again, Southeast Asia is now over 15% of the global market and almost as big as India, and has become bigger than Japan. Japan used to be one of the single biggest importing market before China grew. Hendra mentioned the IEA, and the IEA had an interesting publication in December 2020, which I think we've talked about quite a lot in this presentation, or in these seminar series. And you can see here the past 3 years, coal, how it has been developed. And you saw 19 and 20, you saw a drop in coal in terms of global power consumption from coal. And you see the IEA's predictions that 2020, coal will grow faster than gas, and probably faster than, or as fast as it was in 2018. So we will see a significant rebound this year in general power generation, as well as in coal specifically. So that's good news for the industry. It's also good news for Indonesia. In terms of the actual trade, also from the IEA, 2020, we had a significant drop of 10%, which we discussed before, and that will rebound and have a slight growth next year, which actually will be stronger in the met coal sector, where the growth will probably start to go back to almost 7-8% after a more than 10% drop in 2020. These again are all IEA numbers, which generally I support. They seem to be realistic. The changes in the imports, this is now from 2020 to 21. You can see that the other Asia, which includes Southeast Asia and India, will grow, while a few markets are expected to continue dropping slightly. But the fact is, next year or this year should be healthier than last year, and is subject to nothing crazy happening again. But you can see the significant drop that happened in the past year. Now, everything depends on these coal-fired power plant capacity additions coming up. And we've heard in the press a lot of projects being stopped or reduced because of lack of funding or because of environmental issues. And it can be seen that, yes, these numbers have reduced, but they are still substantially increasing. And most important is that the key markets are Indonesia and Vietnam, continue to be where we expect the largest growth in coal-fired power plant capacity. Now, from a year ago, I found this slide from Wood Mackenzie, and that also then predicted Asian coal power plant capacity growth, which was very large, or is still expected to be very large in 2025, and then go down until 2030. These numbers probably have to be revised slightly down after last year's, some of the last year's publications, but I expect that growth will continue, and this is the import-dependent coal power plant capacity growth, which will continue in the various markets and primarily in Southeast Asia. Now, 2021 starts with large market distortions. And these distortions are interesting. You can see here how coal, in terms of bulk trade from the sea perspective, from the vessel perspective, has grown and then dropped this 10% drop in 2020. Iron ore grew, grains grew, and then the smaller ones is not that important. But that has, of course, caused a significant distortion also in the freight market. And that freight market has really driven a lot of the demand and supply balances in the world. You can see that the 2021 started with extremely high freight rates. This is just Supramax rates compared to previous years. And this is again an opportunity for Indonesia because coal from further far away is penalized more than Indonesia is. But these distortions continue to play an important role. Now, for instance, Indonesian market price went up substantially. South African price leveled off a little bit. So now India is buying South Africa if they can. So the pendulum swings very quick away from Indonesia into other markets or back to Indonesia when other markets become expensive. And that is something to keep in mind. And we just recently concluded several cargoes into the Southeast Asian and Indian market from South Africa, because today South African coal is significantly cheaper than Indonesian coal. This is just this price increase that we've seen in the HBA. I mean, you're all aware of this. I mean, the prices have literally doubled. Now, Vietnam. This is an old one from almost 2 years ago, which predicted a growth of over 80 gigawatts at that time, and also predicted how the import volumes will grow in Vietnam. And what I found interesting was that 2020, they predicted that Vietnam will import 40 million tons. In fact, they imported 45 million tons last year. So the predictions made came true so far. How we will see in the next years, you know, we can all make our own predictions, but I would assume that these numbers are not that far from the truth. So Vietnam is going to be one of the key markets. It's also a difficult market, not an easy market, but we have many Vietnamese colleagues here that will probably tell us more a little bit later. Steel production last year, just to give you a sense, I mean, it's amazing how Vietnam has gone through this crisis, and the GDP grew at 3%, and the trade surplus was over $20 billion, and the forecast is 6.5 to 7% for 2021, probably amongst the highest in the world. Thailand, very constant imports, not much to say here, you know, probably at what, 30 million tons or something. Not, no, Indonesia plays a key role. You see the orange numbers. Malaysia, I don't have the breakdown here, but of course, Indonesia is very, very important, has grown in the past years. It's now at almost 35 million tons, if I'm not mistaken, and Indonesia's share is very, very large. Bangladesh, not the ASEAN, but still an important market in the Southeast Asian region, I would say. Will probably level off this year or this season. It will expect it to grow, but the imports will probably come off. But just to give you a sense, Indonesia's share here is also relatively high. Indonesia itself, being a Southeast Asian country, an ASEAN country, is very, very important. And these are numbers from the ICMA. I mean, Hendra, you're very well aware of this. But there is this COVID drop, right? This COVID drop is substantially and substantial, and that will take off every year 15, 20 million tons of domestic demand. So there is this adjustment locally. Everybody was expecting Indonesia to grow substantially. There's this drop here in 2021, even in 2020, even 2021, we're back to numbers from 2-3 years ago. So there is additional supply capacity that is now not being taken up domestically, that has to find a home in the market, which of course we need you to be aware of and watch out for. Now, in terms of the future, we started with, you know, how coal will, you know, the killing coal and all those things. The Energy Institute of Japan, just beginning of last year, issued this, and they predict that global coal production will remain relatively stable, even still slightly grow for a few years. And I support that, just driven by demand. And we're talking now a little bit more macroeconomically. The changes in global coal consumption, even the IEA, who tends to be very conservative and very negative on coal, predicts that in the next 5 years, globally, we're more or less going to stay stable. And of course, US, Europe goes down and Asia goes up substantially. So a significant opportunity for Indonesia again. Why? Very simple, because the power consumption per capita in those countries, in the Asian countries, Southeast Asian countries, is just far below the world average. And the power needs to come from somewhere. And it happens to be that actually gas is more expensive, and even for the climate, gas is no benefit compared to coal if you do talk about climate change and all those things. Now, what I also found interesting, just to put in perspective, the GDP drop to 2050 grows to 10% because of COVID. That is a recent study from October from the Energy Institute in Japan. So we will have a long-term slow reduction of growth because of this COVID crisis that will stay with us for many, many years. And that growth decline is quite substantial. And that makes you realize how expensive this COVID crisis has become on the industry at large, the world in total, but also the Asian market. A 10% drop by 2050. And on my personal subject, I love to give you this one, which says that even if all negative climate predictions were true, the cost from global warming in the worst fossil fuel driven scenario would be 5.7% of GDP drop. So it's just amazing that basically even, I mean, everybody talks about the climate, but this is, by the way, from one of the gentlemen, Northus, who got the economics Nobel Prize for his analysis, saying that even in the worst predictions, the GDP drop is 5.7% because of climate change compared to 10% because of COVID. So just to put things into perspective, this is a serious crisis, much, much worse than what anything else we can see. And putting it in perspective, we have very, very big issues to deal with. All right, I'm almost done. There's one more important slide, and I apologize for being a bit full. But a recent study by Boston Consulting Group, my former company, and the IEF in Saudi Arabia found that this is oil and gas, that the investments in oil and gas have been dropping. In fact, they're expected to drop 20% from 2020 to 21. And these investments need to rise by $220 to $250 billion in the next few years to starve off a crisis, to literally avoid a crisis in fossil fuels. This is oil and gas. Now imagine we do it as coal. It's basically the same. There's a significant risk to the global world of energy if what's currently happening continues. The industry needs investment. This is not only coal, but see what happens in oil and gas. I can tell you right now, the next 5 years will be crucial to ensure energy stability and energy security for the world. And the crisis that the oil and gas industry goes into is probably only a fraction of what the coal goes into in terms of supply, in terms of energy supply. And I'm saying this to encourage people and miners to put your money in, because there'll be bright times with the pricing coming, because supply is limited, will remain limited. And that means that prices will not go down to last year's level again, at least unlikely. Who knows? I know predictions. So investors will have to rise 25% in the next 3 years to stave off a crisis. I mean, an interesting study. If you read it, have a chance, or you can contact me if you want a copy. Anyways, that was my introduction. Hendra, hope to have a good discussion with everyone else, more specifically on some of the markets, but I think this put things into perspective.